Are you having to go through the unfortunate circumstance of getting divorced and you need some advice on what to do with your marital residence? Hi, I'm Rebecca Foote from the Rebecca Foote Mortgage Team, and today I have a very special guest with me, Kara Haggerty from the law offices of Peter Russo. Thanks so much for coming on today, Kara, and giving us some advice on how to handle these situations.
Thanks for having me, Rebecca.
Absolutely. So tell our viewers a little bit about you before we get into all the juicy advice.
Well, to boil it down, I guess I've been an attorney for about 20 years in the central Pennsylvania area, primarily working in the area of family law.
All right. So tell us how a divorce works.
Sure.
I fortunately have never been through it, so I don't know a whole lot. So give me some, okay, I need to file. What do I do?
So when a party decides that they want to get a divorce, it usually starts with filing a complaint. We file a complaint, and then there are mandatory waiting periods that are implemented by the state that we have to follow. During that time is when we look to divide the marital assets of the parties. The primary marital asset is typically the marital residence.
Okay, so with that residence, they can either sell it during that time frame, or one of them could choose to stay in the home.
Right, and that's one of the bigger decisions that people make, is whether or not they want to keep their house or if they're going to sell it and divide the proceeds that they get from the sale.
Okay, so how often are people able to work that out on their own versus having to go to an actual court and have a judge divide all their stuff up?
So that type of question is a little bit complicated. I would say that a majority of people will work it out on their own, with usually the assistance of an attorney to draw up all the necessary agreements. Rarely, but on occasion, do you have to go to court and have a judge tell you exactly how your assets are going to be divided.
Well, that's a good thing.
Yes.
So I know there's a term for that. If you're able to work it out with your spouse and say, okay, here's what we want, what's that called? Collaborative?
When we're doing more or less like a collaborative divorce, okay, or mediating the assets or the divorce. There are a lot of ways to get through a divorce process, and we try to make litigation one of the last ones.
It makes sense to me.
Yeah.
And that's more costly too, of course, right?
Of course.
Okay, so we're at the point now where one of the spouses wants to keep the home.
Okay.
So tell us the legal side of that, and then the documents and what you can and cannot do.
So when one spouse or the other wants to keep the marital residence, the first decision is who's staying and who's leaving. Regardless of who is staying in the home or leaving the home, we need to address the ownership and, most importantly, the financial responsibility for the home. So that is the deed and the mortgage. Once we decide who is going to keep the home, it's important for them to talk to a lender to refinance the marital residence, most importantly, the mortgage for the financial responsibility of the residence.
That's true, and we get that a lot because a lot of people think, oh, I can just move the deed into my spouse's name and I'm off of everything. But that's not the case, right?
No, that's not the case at all, and many people make that mistake because a deed can be changed fairly easily just by removing one spouse's name from the deed, but that doesn't mean that you're not financially responsible and the bank won't come after you for the mortgage on the residence.
Yes. So just to keep our viewers informed here, the deed is the ownership of the house. That's who actually owns the property. And then you have a mortgage, which is the piece of paper that's going to tie your deed to a note, and the note is your obligation to repay back that loan. So the mortgage, if somebody is on the deed, they have to be on the mortgage. So if the husband's going to keep the house, that's fine, but he's going to have to refinance it to get the wife off of the mortgage itself. And the only way to do that is a refi. You can't just file a piece of paper.
Right, exactly. You have to go through the process of a refinance, and I'm always cautioning the person who is not keeping the house to not sign off on the deed until they know that they're off of that financial responsibility. That's the most important thing, to be sure that you're not obligated to pay that mortgage ongoing after you're divorced.
And that makes complete sense. And that's where I know our office and Peter Russo's office, we work very well together, because you guys will send them over here. We'll take a look at their assets and liabilities with their income and all, and make sure that they can afford the refinance, or if they need to sell the property, who's getting what, so we can figure out where the money's coming from to purchase a new one.
Exactly. And I often counsel my clients to contact you, Rebecca, in advance of making that decision, because as part of the division of that asset, the marital residence, we're dividing the equity that remains in that residence. So your refinance will not only encompass the amount of the mortgage that is still owing on the property, but also that additional sum of money that the spouse is paying to the other spouse for their share of the equity in the home. And it's really important for them to know ahead of time, can they afford making that decision?
Yes. And it was changed a couple years ago, probably more than a couple at this point. But it used to be that if you owed a spouse money out of the equity of the home, you had to do what was called a cash out refi. And those cost more money than what's known as a rate term refi, somebody that's just refinancing a loan for a lower interest rate. And the government came out saying, okay, if you are pulling out equity to pay off a spouse, it is no longer considered a cash out refi, which was very good because now you're saving people money, but also cash out refis are limited to 80% of the appraised value, where maybe we need to go to 90 to be able to pay off the spouse. So that was a really good change that the government made to help out people.
Absolutely, because there's no telling where you're going to be in your mortgage when the divorce decision comes about. And if you owe a significant amount but still have some equity to pay out, you could be greater than that 80% that you were talking about.
Yes.
And so that is a good change in certainly my area of law.
Yes, yes. Now, in order for us to do that, we need an MSA. So tell us what an MSA is and what encompasses it.
Of course. An MSA is a marital settlement agreement, and it's the document that divides all of the assets of the parties pursuant to the divorce. So we take a look at the whole picture, and again, like I said, the marital residence tends to be one of the more primary assets of the parties. But we'll look at bank accounts, retirement accounts, vehicles, any other asset or debt of the parties, determine who is taking responsibility for what, and then we write that into an agreement, the MSA, and that is the equitable distribution of the marital property for that couple.
Yes. And it's also important to note, depending on what assets and liabilities have to get divided up, we do not need an MSA in order to do the mortgage. It's definitely helpful, and if we can get them, it's definitely something we want. But we can do it with just a divorce decree if it had gotten that far before we are doing the loan.
Exactly,
So.
And it's important to know that if a couple or parties decide what they're going to do with the marital residence, that can be addressed and the refinance process can take place even before the divorce decree is entered. And that's where the MSA really comes into play, so that the lender knows the terms of the division for the parties. But if we wait until after the divorce is entered, then that's not as necessary for you as the lender.
Exactly. So Kara, one thing I love about working with your office when you have these clients that are going through the situation, they need title work done as well for their refinance or purchase of a new property, and you guys handle that as well.
Yes, our law firm does do title work, and we can handle the closing on the refinance of the marital residence as well. So we like to be able to work together with a lender and keep everything close at hand, because then you and I can work really well together on the documents that are needed.
Yes.
Not only the marital settlement agreement, but on occasion, you also need a spousal waiver. Is that right?
Yep. If the other spouse is not going on the new loan, then yes.
Right.
Which is the whole point of the refi.
And from the title aspect, oftentimes, lenders will need that spousal waiver just as an added protection, so that the chain of title is protected down the road when we have married people refinancing to a separate party when the divorce might not yet be final.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Well, thank you so much for coming in and joining us today and explaining to us about the divorce and how it all comes together.
Absolutely, and I really appreciate you having me and having this opportunity to talk about this part of our jobs.
Absolutely. So I'm Rebecca Foote from the Rebecca Foote Mortgage Team. You can find both Kara and my information below. Please don't forget to hit subscribe, and we look forward to talking with you soon.